we do have the scientific evidence if we were to look at it, but it's just sitting there dormant.
I believe from my own research going back, not quite as far as Professor Johansson's, but maybe pushing 30 years, and my mother's scientific research as well, that this has been deliberate. From my own experience, I know that everything is covered up so that we are kept in the dark. And then with the media, we have a situation where now in the United States, the 5 corporations, multinational corporations, are controlling almost 90% of radio, television, newspapers, and a good chunk of the Internet. So it's controlled, what I call Hollywood PR, where it's more important for via the media that we see war and chaos and harm than the truth. The truth is, going back to the ancient Greeks, we need to work on creating a world that is not full of misinformation, disinformation, and harm. The harm is off the scale. And I wanted to share something that Professor Johansson and I were talking about earlier this year, because I'm kind of in the thick of what has happened here in the United States. The opting out of the smart meters is not available consistently throughout the United States. It depends on the utility and even the cost, which is pretty steep. No matter where you pay, and I did this just recently because I was fighting this in Maine for the last year and a half, and Olle was very, very kind, and even writing our town managers to put a stop to putting the smart meters in January. And I believe it's all rigged from the inside, but you can't prove this hardly without causing some kind of tremendous sensation. But at any rate, so there are a few people in my community that have opted out, but we're paying steep prices. And so that's one aspect of it. But I know from the research and just driving across the country now for the 10th time since '06, that there are at least 2 states, that is Massachusetts and Virginia, where up to about 6 years ago, there were perhaps the precursors of these smart meters called digital meters that were wireless and read either at the street on a telephone pole or at some other cell tower connection. And people who want to opt out are told, and I know this even from just the last week of talking to a doctor in Massachusetts, that they cannot opt out of these digital meters because they are not, quote, smart meters. And this is also happening in Virginia. But the harm is the same. It might have been a precursor, I believe it is, but I'm still investigating this. But the point is that we have, and Professor Johansson's the expert on this, we have this unmitigated 24/7, 365, multi-pronged, what I call a multi-pronged assault, which I just mentioned at my lecture I gave in Los Angeles at this 3-day conference, that is creating such harm, but it's all invisible. So it's very, very difficult for the average person who is not well educated in the sciences or in mathematics to understand that something invisible, as I've written in my last book, the uterine crisis, invisible doesn't mean safe. And I know from staying at a friend's house last year where they had the smart meter put on and they were never even told in Southern California, you feel very sick very, very quickly. And you can't go to a doctor because they're clueless. They have absolutely minimal to no training about any of the environmental issues that are assaulting us all the time.
Well, you have that combined with the fact that they don't have the empirical data that they need, apparently, to be able to make some of the decisions about whether these things are safe or not, that a doctor, for instance, would go by. They don't get access to the kinds of work that Olle has been doing for, 30 years now or more?
Well, nearly 40 years, yeah.
40 years. That's the amazing thing, is that we have this information, and I keep going back to this, we have this information from 40 years back, and you were a pioneer in that, Olle, in terms of what you were doing and your insights at that time. And you're no slouch yourself. You're a professor in neuroscience. And so this is not something, and you come from a very prestigious university where this kind of empirical evidence is necessary in terms of the work you're doing. So we're not talking about some hypothesis or some ideas here. We're talking about some actual facts.
But there's another aspect to this too, Joni, and that is, as a former university professor myself, is that universities are not independent centers the way perhaps they might have been decades ago. The corporations are underwriting the research and the direction of the research. Olle, I'm sure, knows this as well in Europe, so that anybody who speaks out, anybody who criticizes the direction of the research based on what the foundation wants, is hounded.
The problem here in Europe is exactly the same, and of course for everyone it's becoming more and more clear that the governments and the parliaments and the health authorities with the industry hand in hand, and they say that all these gadgets and techniques are completely safe, and from a hygienic point of view it would be extremely important that they allowed all scientists, even scientists working independently, to investigate this, because if these things are safe, then all scientists will find the same road to London. Everyone will end up at the same point. Every scientist will find that this is safe. And then, of course, also the layman, persons out there, the consumers, would have another basis for trust. They could see that every scientist actually did show the very same. And I find this is a lack of democracy. If you had called me 40 years ago, I was very naive. I thought that, no, all the elected officials, they do take care of the population. But we have learned differently, haven't we? And today we realize that even public health has a price tag. That is shocking. And to sort of summarize, the day I will pass away and die, I will be disappointed. Sweden, for instance, which is one of the democracies in the world, it's not very democratic at all. It's run by money. That's the thing, you know.
The money is the controlling factor with what is going on today, and I would agree with you 100%, Olle.
Yeah, you see the parallels to today's questions, because many of these wireless systems that we are talking about, they are close to beds, to kitchens, to playrooms, to schoolrooms, and similar locations. They are never off, and the exposure is not voluntary, and they are being forced on citizens and their children everywhere. And based on this, the inauguration of wireless systems with grudging and involuntary exposure of millions to billions of human beings to these pulsed microwave radiations should, according to me, immediately be prohibited until this kind of red flag can be hauled down once and for all. And to achieve that, and I have talked about that for decades, you know, over and over again, completely independent research projects must be started immediately to ensure our public health, and they should be entirely independent of all types of commercial interests. Public health, as I said before, cannot have a price tag, and they should only be based on public need and not on any flimsy best project in competition with others' arguments. And it's also paramount importance that scientists involved in such projects must be free, totally free of any career considerations, and that the funding need is covered to 100%. And this is the clear responsibility of the democratic elected bodies of every country, and it must be in everyone's interest, I feel at least, including also the industry and the financial sector, to develop tomorrow's human-friendly and green technology, and to do it now. And what we see in science today definitely speaks in opposition to this.
Well, this is true, Ole. What I see here in the United States and in Canada, and of course from my travels to Europe, is that the corporations have so embedded themselves that they have personhood, the same as a human being, and they, I believe it's malevolent. We need another paradigm, which I have talked about a lot, and you have as well. We need a paradigm based not in corporate greed and in lies and deceit, but we need a paradigm that is based in truth and integrity and compassion and independence. And the only way that's going to happen, I believe, is first if we have an informed public, which right now we do not because the media is in control. And I believe we need to take back our countries, and I mean this in a very peaceful way. I believe it is possible. Joni, you and I have talked about this. Just go home. Just go home and do not, shut the countries or shut the companies down. The buck stops, as I keep saying, at the cash register, where you do not have to pay your hard-earned dollars or kronas or lira. Well, there's no more lira anymore with the euro, but we don't have to support these companies that are creating such harm. I believe there is a great possibility because there are millions of people now who are informed about what is going on, in great part because there are solid internet sites and the sharing of information that I see. And
also, of course, excellent writers like yourself, radio show producers like Ioanni and others that are spreading this message, which is a completely other type of message. And as you say, it's very peaceful, but it takes a stance from the fact that people's lives should be much better if they were based on actual and true need instead of a lot of commercial products that they think they need. They have been fooled by ads and PR and so on into thinking that they actually need all these things, which they don't. And I'm very stressed because, and of course, all around this planet there are enormous problems and dangers to anything from bacteria, plants, to insects, fishes, birds, animals. The whole planet is actually right now at jeopardy, and people just meet and sit down at different big meetings and they talk, but there is very little action.
Be informed, get your education under your belt, but then to take the bold gesture of informing other people and taking a stand against these initiatives when they come along, because the smart meters are no different than any other consumer product. No. We are paying for it out of our pocket, and we are being forced into paying for it rather than going to the store and deciding what we're going to purchase. It's being inflicted upon us, which I think is another aspect of this as far as consumers that we should be up in arms about, but nobody seems to be seeing that aspect of it. They're looking at the science and they understand that part of it. But just on the face of it, who comes to your house and reinstalls something, comes onto your property, says you have to have this, and then decides what the rates are? You can't even see the little wheel spinning anymore, which is what I used to do. I used to show my kids, here, you see, this is how much hydro we're using, and I'd show them, when this wheel is spinning, that means we're using a lot of electricity. Now you can't even do that. It's very cryptic, and you can't read it. You have to have certain
and
reading meters.
I have personally actually phoned a number of Swedish utility companies, because here in Sweden all these smart gadgets and smart meters have been sold under the assumption that you will have a heavy reduction in your personal cost for electricity. And I never see that. The electricity bill every month is just slowly increasing. So after a few months, I actually phoned a number of companies and asked them, when will I see this reduction in cost as a consumer? And most of these companies didn't even understand the question. But one woman actually at one of the companies, she was very honest, and she laughed and said, you will never get a reduction, you will only get increases, what you think. And then she hung up, you know.
This is planned, Ole. We have this here too. You know, no matter what the utility is, Pacific Gas and Electric, Central Maine Power, NSTAR in Massachusetts, San Diego Gas and Electric, Edison, or BC Hydro. This is planned. This has been planned.
Yeah, and
I'm sure in the corporate boardroom.
So what I find very annoying is that if they had been honest with all these things, telling me as a consumer that for this reason and that reason, we will use new meters or new light bulbs or whatever, and it's because we have an increased cost situation or whatever, you can have understood it and you can have sort of swallowed the arguments. But I hate to find out after a few years that it was just, again, yet another scam.
Well,
I just hate that as a consumer, you know.
Right. This is here. Well, there's two issues. We as consumers are not citizens. We're expendable. A citizen is a different scenario, but we have this, what I consider a facade, no matter where we're living. And it's a crumbling facade because people are more and more becoming informed about what I consider criminal. It's criminal when you harm somebody and you lie to them. When Central Maine Power came in here, they never told any of the consumers how dangerous the meters were. This is true all along in California too, or at BC Hydro. They never told anyone how dangerous this pulsing was and how off the scale it was in hertz, that it was going to damage us. But they didn't say anything. And if we are treated like expendable consumers, then we don't have a prayer. And I think, as you and I have been talking about for a long time, is that the last nail in the coffin is that our brain function is not working right. I was writing about that before you and I were in touch, and it seems to me that this is another stealth level of harm, that it's not an accident. It's intentional, a way of controlling people. We've got 6 billion cell phones on the market in people's pockets and in dangerous places that are pulsing, and they were never informed. Not one consumer was ever informed about how dangerous they are. And I even on a personal level, I don't own a cell phone because 2 of my dearest friends died from brain cancer, glioma brain cancers, which is specific from the cell phones. And I'm having a running argument with my son now for 12 years about, Ma, you need, as he says to me, Ma, a grown man, Ma, you need a cell phone so that people can keep in touch with you. And I keep saying, I don't need it. I don't need to be reachable 24/7, and I don't want, having had 2 of my friends die, and talking one of them to, I spoke to his brain surgeon, his neurosurgeon. I don't want that. I don't want that for me. My mission is, and I take it as a sacred trust, we are caretakers. We are supposed to be caretakers on this planet. It's our home. We're treating it like a toilet, like a trash
That's very
bin.
true. Yeah,
and what we need We need to stop and think, and this is very hard to do because we're running all around and we're assaulted on so many different fronts, but it's planned. I believe from all my research it's planned, and when you look at this article last year in New Scientist about 147 corporations, multinational corporations running the planet, and most of them are banksters and chemical companies, the plan is all along. When you start taking a seed and saying that we can control the DNA in the seed and cross all sorts of harmful things and insert genes that have no place in this, something is radically wrong with the ethics and the moral stand in all of this. And again, if we're dumbed down and we don't know, or we don't talk across the disciplines, as an academic I know this, it's very hard for an art historian to talk to a physicist, because all of these different areas of study, going back to maybe even before the 19th century Germanic model, maybe even going back to Padua, which was one of the first universities, and women were never allowed up until really the 20th century. Women were not part of the system. Something's wrong with all of this. We live our lives in an interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary way, and we need to talk across the disciplines. And we need to come from a space of peace and kindness and love, and go back to taking time out to be with one another in more spiritual ways, to listen to music. You know that in my writings I'm always, not always, but a lot quoting, I play classical piano. I want to be able to sit down and play a Chopin etude and not have to be running 24/7. We need to take that time to be in nature, to commune.
Part of it is the dumbing down, and part of it is the lack of a spiritual connection, as we were talking about, with each other. And so we have all these things rather than people in our lives.
I'm always surprised that grown-ups in different ages actually accept this kind of new life, which for me many times spells stress and not life. And all these gadgets, and you are reachable 24/7, produces a gigantic stress load. And I just today read that, for instance, children in Sweden, they are becoming more and more and more stressed, and no one is responsible, and no one sort of stands up and just say, stop, enough, now it's enough. And I don't put the blame on any specific tool or gadget or phenomenon. It's just the overall load upon people. And as you say, people not even longer, I see my own relatives, if we get together, people are sitting there texting, they are looking at different images on their smartphone and so on, they are doing things instead of communicating with each other, which, to be honest, makes me very frustrated, because I've traveled a long way. I want to meet them. I want to talk with them. And they are instead talking to their telephone.
There's no eye contact anymore. It's
no.
But I think all of what you're saying, Ole, is very true. And I think personally, from my research and reading all your research, I believe that we are already seeing the early stages of brain dysfunction and brain damage. If we are being assaulted by this myriad of poisoning, it's not sensitivity. I don't believe it's sensitivity, whether we call it multiple chemical sensitivity or multiple or sensitivity to the EMF. It's poisoning, and
I would even say that it's a wear down, and not only of the brain, it's of all the organs in your body.
Yes,
they are being worn down. And I'm just afraid that when you look on the healthcare panorama on the hospitals, the patients, and so on. And you see all these increases that are reported every day in the Swedish media, more of this and that and so. And to me, I'm just afraid it's like a car that is rusting down, you know. And from the very beginning, it was just a small spot, and now you must change everything, you know, because it has been worn down. And I'm afraid our bodies are worn down, and not only our bodies. I look on the whole biotope with all the organisms, including plants and so on. Do they actually like this microwave radiation or not? And looking at experiments, the answer is they don't like it.
One of the things that I've seen both on the east and west coast is that, yes, the biosphere is in grave danger, something that E.O. Wilson was writing about 20 years ago with his research at Harvard and his many books. And I've had snow and air tested. I've been spelling snow S-N-O because it doesn't look like anything that I grew up with, to find heavy rates of arsenic and strontium now with Fukushima, the ongoing nightmare of Fukushima, and barium, which affects the heart, aluminum, nano-covered fiber aluminum, which affects brain function. None of this belongs in our air. The pollution is, and mercury. You know, mercury is a brain killer, and we've known about this. So we add all of this up to this 100,000 myriad of chemicals doing some kind of unbelievable synergistic increase that is really off the scale. In science, every chemical is tested one by one, but in reality, as Dr. Theo Colburn has written in Our Stolen Future, it's 1 + 1 could equal 16 times the dose, and we don't even know what the synergistic dose is, which has got to be off the scale, because everything now is, we have chronic illnesses, and there are multiple chronic illnesses.
Yeah, and don't forget the very elegant studies by Professor Dennis Henshaw in Bristol, where he showed synergistic action between chemicals and electromagnetic fields, ordinary household power line magnetic fields. And as you say, 1 + 1 equals a huge number. And
we don't even know.
It's just swept aside, and people don't pay attention to this, and they just continue to watch game shows or whatever they do, you know. And I get stressed, of course, because as a scientist, you are taught that if you publish in peer-review-based scientific journals, it will have an impact on the society, etc. And I don't really see that. There are few people that are informed, that are educated, and a lot more needs to be done.
My take now, especially with the new layer of the digital precursors to the smart meters, and here in New England, the burning of the rubber tires. I think, Joni, Dr. Young might have sent you that because it's not on the internet, but they are burning in my neck of the woods 2.5 tons of shredded rubber tires every hour, 24/7, 365.
In the name of the environment, they want to keep.
This is consistent.
Crazy.
December of 2010, and we had chronic, horrific illnesses this past winter, which is one of the reasons that I left, because I was critically ill. My animals, my companion pets were ill. Everybody I knew, the hospitals were overloaded with upper respiratory and chronic cardiac problems. And the company that is burning this 25 miles from where I'm living, it's considered green because, first of all, there are no environmental laws that have any teeth because all the agencies are completely corrupt and in collusion with the corporations. And secondly, it's considered green because it's not going in a landfill, but it's being burned in the air, like sarin nerve gas is in at Umatilla, the Army depot south of Portland, Oregon. These things are being burned into the air for us to breathe, and again, more invisible things that make people critically ill, and they're getting away with this criminality, and it is criminal.
Olle and I were talking about fluorescent light bulbs, and in those light bulbs we have mercury, and I just find it so interesting that they are considered to be a quote-unquote green product, and yet who knows what the effects of those are even as they're burning in our home, let alone when we're trying to dispose of them.
And here in Sweden we have a general mercury ban, but at the same time they have now for years accepted these mercury-containing compact fluorescent lamps. So the world is just crazy, I would say.
People don't understand those lamps, I think. I have to admit that we literally bought into it, and they were giving them away, and there was incentives. Yeah. And now I've gone back to the tungsten lamps that we used to have that were perfectly fine and give off a much nicer light anyway. On the face of it, everybody seems to be fine with it, and then they find out, as I did, as you have said, not saving us any money, but they're actually a toxin, not only in our environment when we're burning them and having them in our house, but when we're trying to dispose of them. Now we're going to recycle the glass that has mercury in it.
Yeah.
What's very interesting about the whole mercury issue, the poisoning, is that this is not a new issue. Mercury has been known since ancient times to be a poisoner. And 50 years ago, when my mother was doing her original research, she was one of the leading dentists in New York, which was extraordinary for the time because women weren't dentists in those days. And I used to be told when I was a child from one of her professors that the men used to come to her in graduate school and say, you have no business in dentistry because you're going to have children and you're going to give up your career and you're taking away a seat from a man who's going to support his family. Well, P.S., she had a 47-year international career and was the first American woman to lecture in China. She spoke 6 languages. She lectured all over the world. In fact, Olle, she lectured in Sweden, in Stockholm, in the 50s. But what was interesting is that she had her own lab. And when I was a little girl, even before I really understood the magnitude of what was going on, she was doing research on rat brains, and she had her own microscope, and she knew way back when, in the late 40s and the early 50s, that there was no safe level of mercury, and she was fighting the American Dental Association on this, as her father, my grandfather, had done because he was also a dentist, and he knew in 1900 that it was not safe, and they've been co-opted. The ADA is not an independent, the American Dental Association, or for that matter, the AMA, the American Medical Association. They have been co-opted, so they're not working in a way that is safe. And in all of this, one thing is never considered hardly, and that's the precautionary principle. First, do no harm. And that's off the scale. Nobody thinks about this. And again, I can't help knowing the little bit that I know, that it's not an accident. It's not an accident because the harm is so grave. We have to connect the dots.
Without even getting into the discussion about fluoride, we can look at all these different issues because you look at the dental industry and they've known about the fluoride and where that comes from and what it's doing to us for decades, and yet we're still somehow recommending that children have fluoridated water, fluoridated toothpaste. And so there's all of these issues. When you do connect the dots, as you rightly say, Dr. P., it's very clear that there is a larger picture here.
There's a larger agenda. We can't disregard it. And I go back, if you don't want to use the word cabal or anything else, all you have to do is concretely, as one major example, is look at the article from New Scientist last year, which I've referenced, showing these 147 core companies out of 4,000 that are working on each other's boards and meeting secretly, and when you see the deregulation just here in the United States of environmental laws that were in effect to help us, and basically the shutting down of the whole environmental and organic community. I mean, we can't really think we have organics, even though I've been an organic gardener and a proponent of organics, safe things. But when you see what is allowed in organics, and when you know how poisoned the air, the water, and the soil is, we don't in effect have that. But we have to think really in terms of the gravity of what is going on to our health, to our children, to the basic building blocks of life. And we need to find a peaceful resolution, and it's never going to happen with the people who are in charge now. And that doesn't matter where across the world it's happening, because they have been co-opted by the corporations, and we are expendable again. So we need, one, to be informed, and two, to cross the disciplines, which I feel is essential. I think, Olle, you and I have done that, and I'm very grateful for your openness and willingness to look at different things, and I'm very grateful for all the scientific evidence and research that you have shared with me, which I send to everybody, because this is the way that we become informed, that we cross these disciplines and we look at a safe way. First, do no harm. That's not anymore in the Hippocratic Oath, and it's not anymore in any kind of corporate plan. It just isn't.
No. Also that, I mean, you're very kind that says what you do, you know, and at the same time, I know I could have personally done so much more and so much better if there hadn't been this extremely strong opposition. And you mentioned, which I also think is very important, the precautionary principle. And here in Europe, you know, we have a very strong such principle, and it actually calls for just one single case where it points not to proofs but just to a suspicion. And then the precautionary principle states that you have to act. You have to take all the precautionary measures, and as you say, do good, do no harm at all. But practically, you very rarely see this precautionary principle in play, because there are always other arguments boiling down to employment, salaries, income, profit, greed, etc. It's always the money that eventually will set the stage. And I think it's extremely important what you do and what many, many people do, trying to dig up the facts and put the dots together, as you say, and try to get people informed. And maybe in the future we will have a different society. And I'm just afraid that the clock is running. We don't have that much time to react. It's very important that people trust themselves and that they stand up and say no more. It's enough now, you know.
I really think that the Internet and some of the cross-disciplinary things and the international things that we are doing now have awakened millions of people. And people
especially,
understand,
I would say, the young ones.
Right. And people who
I'm
understand...
very impressed by young people. They are very, very informed. They are very intelligent, and they really want to have a change. And some of their actions may be dramatic, but they are doing it at least. They're not only staying in the TV sofa.
Sorry, I was just going to ask you about that because we are speaking to a university audience as well at CHLY. We are a community radio station, and it is independent, which is why I love it so. But a lot of our audience they're at university. They're the next generation coming up. And I know that when I was that age, I was there protesting the Vietnam War and all the various things that were happening in the Middle East and all the things that were happening at that time. And now we have a really dire situation that they need to address. So when you're speaking to them, what is it that you would like to say to that particular audience of people that are becoming educated, possibly by a system that has been co-opted to a certain extent? What can they do to counteract some of these things and to take action?
I don't think one actually needs to do very much because I say again, I'm very impressed by these young people, and they have urge to really look under every stone. They want to have facts. You cannot spin them in any direction. They want to know the real facts, and they are already asking the very critical questions, and they do take action. And of course, some of them are more active than others. And I say that keep on, put these very critical questions, and do not accept that people are avoiding your questions. Put the question again. Keep on until you have the answer you are looking for, and keep on doing this, and the future definitely belongs to the young ones, and in a sense they need to take also responsibility, which they are. I see in Sweden, for instance, I'm extremely impressed by the young people here. They are very active at all levels of society, in all different kind of action groups and activist groups, political groups, and so on. So I have a very positive view of the future, and after all, I think it will change. And as you said, the tide is turning. There will be an alteration. I'm sure of that.
If I may add something to that, I do agree with you, but what I'm seeing now is that even though it's not reported here, there was a fabulous picture of Madrid, a peaceful gathering not even 2 weeks ago, where the police in Madrid were harming and battering unarmed civilians, and so we're talking tens of thousands of people surrounded the police cars until they had to stop this. And there is much more activism going on in Europe than there is here. But I believe that the time is almost up for the banksters, as I call them, because there are liens on the 12 Federal Reserve private banks here in the United States and their sister companies from the G8 in Europe, and they're out of money. They've been printing what I call green toilet paper here, which is worthless. It's maybe 3 cents to each dollar, and it's not worth anything. Food is becoming much more expensive than it was even a year ago, while so much of it is poisoned. We don't have to buy maybe 3/4 of what's on the shelves if we just read the ingredients, and that's a big issue now in California because they want to list all the genetically modified organisms, and Monsanto is leading the charge, but they're going to lose because people are aware of how toxic these organisms are in the food supply. There's no safe level of GMOs any more than there's any safe level of mercury or fluoride or even the aerosols that are being dumped on us. But I think the banks are out of options. There is going to be accountability. There are already more than 2,000 individuals who have been taken into custody. There's going to be accountability, and we are actually turning the tide because of all the well-informed and increasing in numbers young people and older people who don't want to see this anymore. I want my grandchildren safe. I want everybody's grandchildren safe. I've been saying for decades now, I have no hidden agendas in my professional career. My two agendas in my entire life are that I want everybody well and I want everybody safe. There isn't a country on this planet, well, maybe Iceland, because Iceland has separated themselves from the banksters, but where people are considered nothing but, we're all expendable. And we need to have a base where there is trust and honesty and integrity and compassion, as I've said earlier, and where there is an understanding of the sacredness of life, the entire web of life, from the great whales to the birds. This morning I went out in my garden to find a sparrow dead, and I was very upset. I'm the caretaker here. You know, this is an organic garden for whatever it's worth, because I've been doing this since I was a small child. What brought this little sweetie down? I have to bury her after and put flowers on her grave. We're the caretakers. We've done a wretched job, but there are millions of us now who understand that we have a moral and spiritual responsibility, a deep one. We have the mass of millions of people who understand it's enough, or in Italian, basta, or in French, ça suffit. You know, it's enough. It's enough. We can't go forward by going backwards. We need a new direction, away from fear, which is what the corporations have wanted to do, because they make piles of money when there's war. Joni, I thank you for both of us for this opportunity to let university students know that there is a new direction, that we will take charge in peace, in friendship, in compassion, in understanding, just the way I learned growing up in New York City. We are very unconscious, at least here in the United States. We're pretty unconscious, and I think we have this opportunity now in a very positive way to say, that's enough.
The idea that we have a science that is melded with a spiritual view of life, an educated view of life, the quotient is that we combine all of these things and we come against the corporate aspect of what's going on. And so if we apply the same principles as we do economically to change, that we stand up against certain things that are threatening to take over in terms of the economy, then we will see change, because that happened in the past, Vietnam, all these different things where people just said, no, we're not going to take it anymore. Some of us do have to have that attitude to get to a place of peace. We actually have to go to a place of not being complacent anymore and not just allowing things to wash over us, but to stand up and take all of this information, to get more information, and to disseminate it to others and wake up so that we can help other people to wake up as well. What are some of the resources that we can offer people who are listening to the show?
Olle, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I agree to 100%. I just wish I could express myself as good as you do, the two of you, and I just agree to 100%, and I do hope that I will see this come true. So I look to the future with bright and hopeful eyes, I would say. And also for Swedes, we want to have some happiness, because in Sweden, you know, right now it's a very dark time. The autumn and winter is here. There's very little light. So if you can bring some extra light and extra happiness to us, we would be very, very thankful.
Oh, well, I'll be happy to come over to Sweden and spread my light there.
But no contact fluorescent lamps then, you know.
No, I'm hoping that people will start to find the research, and I'm hoping your research, Olle, will get done and that people will pick up on that, even people who are in the sciences right now. I'm hoping that whether we have this funding or not, we have the initiative. I can see people using their gifts and talents as much as money and dedicating time, as we do here at CHLY. All of us are volunteers. We put a lot of time and energy into what we believe is important, and for me it's getting the information out. For you it's doing the research and getting the information, but we all need to work together to use our gifts and talents in ways that are going to change the world. As I say, there are scientists, there are researchers, there are up-and-coming journalists, there are all sorts of people out there that would probably love to get involved in some of these. When people contact you, I know you're often overwhelmed. I don't know how you do it because you have your finger in all these different pots and you're willing to write letters for individual situations that come up. Now, are there ways that we can not inflict all of these extra burdens on you and that they can use some of the resources that are already there to say put a stop to the smart meters in their area or those kinds of things?
But I'm happy to help people as much as I can, and so if people need some support or help, I try to find time. But as you say, sometimes I'm overwhelmed. And that's just to say the least, because the need out in the world is extremely high. There are so many people asking for support and help, and people are getting ill and they are getting harmed, and they are looking for some kind of explanations. And I have to say, as I said before, I wish I could have done so much more, but both time-wise, but also from a resource point of view. It's very, very hard time to do anything when you hardly can buy the ink to the printer, So I wish in my next life I will have a little better opportunity to really help everyone.
Well, I'm hoping in your next life that you won't have to, because it's going to be a perfect world. But you can put your talents to better use in terms of coming up with some really great inventions. It sounds as though you're quite an inventor as well.